Universal Disclosure Podcast welcomes Ms. Mary Rodwell.
I'd have probably sent anyone who had experiences that I've come across now, many thousands actually. I'd have probably suggested they need greater help than me. I've heard you're open-minded, Mary. For this, they just think you're a loony. There's no support groups or anything. He'd wake up with marks on his body. He'd wake up wondering how this all happened. He had the children were having experiences, and he said, "Can you help?" It's harder for ufology to get a grasp of the tangibility of this experience, and I now have a good understanding why. Like one had experienced a haunting, somebody else had another strange deja vu experience and whatever. And so instead of saying that they thought Ellis was crazy, they all said, I've had a really weird experience once I've never really understood. And I thought, there's all these people telling me that they've had strange experiences. So why aren't we discussing that? Why aren't we looking at what does this mean? I say this is global in terms of I've had people from all over the world, even those that don't speak English, explain to me they had experiences. You can have lawyers, doctors, nurses, social workers. You can have farmers, children, housewives. It really doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what they do or don't believe. And that's really, really important here. Because when we're talking about contact or experiences, we're talking about physical non-human intelligences, interdimensional, extra-dimensional, trans-dimensional, and even some from our future. What we discovered was this, that 75% of them believed that it was their consciousness, not their physical body, that was having interactions with these intelligences. Only 25% was physical. That's why it makes it very hard for ufologists that are nuts and bolts to actually get a handle on it, because people are not bringing back bits of the craft or whatever. So 75% literally is out of body. One of the most fascinating responses to how people changed after their experiences, 85% of those, 4,000, said they had a psycho-spiritual transformation. So it isn't necessarily, as some want to put it into boxes and say, well, that's the spiritual and that's the UFO stuff. No, we found it's all in the same bucket, if you like. It's just that the interpretation, the perspective of the individual will interpret it in a certain way. They may be happy to think, well, it's angels or it's ascended masters. Well, actually, they can be same. Teachers, different educators. I mean, the caliber of information, medical doctors. I've got a list of medical doctors that have had experiences and what have you as well. So that tells you everything. We have been geared into worshipping these intelligences that have come to our planet with this technology, thinking they're gods. Where does that take religion? I won't go there, because I think you can extrapolate from that.
The following program is presented for general information, education and entertainment purposes only, and is not intended to be advice of any kind. The content, views, thoughts and opinions expressed in this program are those of the individuals involved. The use of information on this program is at the user's own discretion.
Stuart, Reverend Stu, how are you? And do you like our new studio setup here?
I'm great. I love what you've done with the place, Mike. Looks fantastic.
Thank you very much. Wanted to change things up a little bit, But how's things going in your neck of the woods?
It's going good. I'm really enjoying doing these shows, and some of my friends have been watching the shows and commenting to me, Stuart, you've got some interesting friends there. And when I reflect, I think I definitely do, Mike.
Nice. I would have to agree. Indeed you do. And perhaps, maybe some folks will eventually say the same for me. I don't know how many of my friends are actually watching, but there are people all over the world who are. Obviously, United States and Australia are pretty much right up at the top of the list, right? And not necessarily surprisingly enough, it's almost 50-50 men and women, males and females. But I think this topic really grabs like everybody's attention and wonderment. Dominican Republic, Mexico, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, Cambodia, Brazil, Honduras, Nicaragua, El Salvador, Argentina, Chile, Russia, Algeria, Jamaica, Sri Lanka, Ukraine, Egypt. I mean, this list goes on and on. India, Morocco, Spain, Iraq, Uruguay, United Kingdom. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in, and do help us spread the conversations everywhere, because, again, we put them out for free. And if you want to join in these conversations, we also have an open call still out there where you can email us a 10-minute or less audio of your experience and how it changed your spirituality. A couple episodes ago, there was a 5-minute video that we put out there with the directions for all that. But, as we say, welcome one and all, wherever and whenever you may be. This is Universal Disclosure, meeting the moment. My name is Mike, an active UAP field investigator here in Southern California, with my friend and co-host,
Reverend Stu in Melbourne, Australia.
Excellent. And I do want to put it out there, too, just apologies in advance. There looked like there was a little delay, or sounded like anyway, Stuart. We have internet issues today, potentially. Last couple of days, there's been internet issues all over the world. Hopefully we get through this with not a lot of glitching. It's really beyond our control at this point, so fingers crossed. And in this next episode, we are going to be breaching the topic of the phenomenon that is called abductions, sometimes called experiences. And this is ultimately where this conversation does go, and it can get into the weeds. Some people might call it woo, but there is. This is true and serious stuff. So, Stuart, who is going to be breaking the ice with us on this topic of abductions?
All right, well, today's guest is clinical therapist Mary Rodwell, who I've met. She lives here in Australia. I've attended one of her workshops, which is absolutely fascinating. And Mary was born in the United Kingdom and migrated to Western Australia in 1991 and now resides in Queensland, Australia. Mary is a former nurse, midwife and health educator, and was employed as a professional counsellor for the National Health Service UK and Australian counselling agencies Silver Chain and Centrecare. Since 1994, Mary has worked in a private practice as a professional counsellor, hypnotherapist, metaphysical teacher, researcher, author, Reiki Master, and international speaker. Mary's the founder and principal of the Australian Close Encounter Resource Network and the co-founder and director of Astronaut, Dr. Edgar Mitchell's Foundation for Research into Extraterrestrial Encounters. Universal Disclosure Podcast welcomes Ms. Mary Rodwell.
All right, Ms. Rodwell, thank you so much for joining us here at Universal Disclosure. We really appreciate your time.
It's an absolute pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Indeed, yeah. So we have a tradition here. We start with asking our guests a musical question, and I'm wondering if you don't mind sharing who your favorite music artist is or your favorite song is.
Oh, I don't know if I put in any songs, but I like Enya, some of her stuff, and Sting and Queen. But, there's only particular songs in all of that. But I don't listen to music very often because I like the silence after 3 kids and 6 grandchildren.
Oh, my gosh, yeah.
Silence is golden.
Oh, indeed, yeah. Enya is beautiful, though. I like almost everything that she's put out. It's good stuff.
It puts me in the right space. It's all about frequency, isn't it? And that's what I really enjoy, is something that's calming and peaceful most of the time. Excuse me.
Oh, yeah, atmospheric and beautiful.
Yeah, very much. Yeah, Stuart, do you wanna start out here?
Okay, well, thank you, Mary, for joining us. It's wonderful to see you again. I've met you in person, attended one of your workshops, which I found absolutely fascinating and informing. I'd like to ask this first question, please. Could you please share your career path with us and how you found yourself specialising in a certain type of therapy?
Stuart, it's a good question. And as a previous nurse and midwife 45 years ago in the UK, I would have said this was probably the most extreme projection of my career at this time in my life. I'd have probably sent anyone who had experiences that I've come across now, many thousands actually, I'd have probably suggested they need greater help than me at the time, simply because I wasn't aware of how commonplace this was. But from nursing, I was a stay-at-home mum for a while. And it was then I got introduced to counselling at a medical practice where I worked for about 2 or 3 years. And counselling was fairly rare at that time. It was something that had only just come in as a very good way of dealing with illness. I got to enjoy it so much that when I came to Australia in 1991, I continued and I did grief and bereavement counselling and really enjoyed that. And from that, worked in a Catholic counselling agency for a while. But all the time, when you're working with people that have had loss and severe grief, or know that they're, in hospice, that they haven't got long to live, brings up all the big questions.
Yeah.
What I'd be asked, what happens after death? What do I think happens after death? This kind of thing. And many people had had profound experiences facing their mortality or facing the loss of a loved one. And it got me exploring even more. I will say I've always been interested in the weird and the wonderful, right from a small child, questioning life after death, all these kind of things. But it was really being with people and their experiences that really facilitated more intense research from my point of view. Was the reincarnation? What was that? All those kind of things. And ultimately, to cut a long story short, I got involved in hypnosis and not just doing, stop smoking and this kind of thing. I got interested in what we call past lives. And that was fascinating because I realized that often a past life can impact on a present life. And I've had many instances of that where someone would have a phobia and I'd take them into a past life where they might have a phobia of drowning, for example, and finding out what was behind that. So it fascinated me, this greater reality. And I think it prepared me for the time that this wonderful gentleman who lives in England now, Ellis Taylor, who's born in Western Australia, he's an author of his own now, came to me and said, "I've heard you're open-minded, Mary. For this, they just think you're a loony. There's no support groups or anything." He'd wake up with marks on his body. He'd wake up wondering how this all happened. He would have a partner that had experiences. He had the children were having experiences. And he said, "Can you help?" Unfortunately, or synchronously, I'd read 2 books only a short time previously. And one of them was Dr. John Mack's book, Abduction, Human Encounters with Aliens. And this was, again, as you know, a former, he was a head psychiatrist at Harvard University. He wrote the book, not only Abduction, Human Encounters with Aliens, where he was convinced after psychological testing that this was real, and then he wrote Passport to the Cosmos. The second one, and most important, is the classic Communion by Whitley Strieber, where there's an experiencer saying, this is how it was real for me. So fortunately, I had those 2 as my help until I decided, where do I go with this? And ultimately, after doing advanced counselling for a short while, realizing they couldn't help me because I took it as a case study, and nobody thought Ellis was crazy. They started to tell me about their own strange experiences. I realized I'm on my own. I had to start looking into this. So cutting long story short, ultimately I started support groups in Perth, Western Australia. And from that, created the Australian Close Encounter Resource Network, because even with UFO groups, those that had experiences, many of the groups were not capable of supporting experiences. They were great at where was the craft, how big was the craft, how many saw it, have you got pictures, all that kind of thing. But somebody having ongoing experiences, there was no one or very few people that could actually support them or were prepared to support them, because it was still, even in ufology, and to a certain extent even now, it's harder for ufology to get a grasp of the tangibility of this experience. And I now have a good understanding why.
Now, were you saying there that you went to other medical professionals to talk about it, and then at that point they confided in you their own experiences?
So that was the fascinating thing. I was doing advanced counselling at the Wesley Institute in Perth. I don't know if it still exists, in fact. But when I decided to take Ellis's case, because I thought, well, I don't understand what's going on. Is he fantasy prone? Is he schizophrenic? Is it real? All those things. I believed him because he came over with such authenticity and integrity. But I wanted to hear what other professionals would think. And there was a uniting minister, psychologists. They were all doing advanced counselling, and it was a supervision. And it was my case study. And I was very wary about taking it because it was so unusual, thinking, well, what are they going to think, And the fascinating thing was that nearly every one of them came up with unusual experiences they had. Like one had experienced a haunting, somebody else had another strange deja vu experience and whatever. And so instead of saying that they thought Ellis was crazy, they all said, I've had a really weird experience once I've never really understood. And I think the supervisor didn't know quite what to do with it because he wasn't expecting that, And I thought, there's all these people telling me that they've had strange experiences. So why aren't we discussing that? Why aren't we looking at what does this mean? Rather than, the person there must be something wrong with them. Not one of them suggested Ellis was crazy. Not one of
Wow.
them.
Well, that leads me into the next question I was going to ask, which is what type of people seek your services as a therapist?
Very good question, Stuart. And I will tell you all and sundry. Let's say that it doesn't matter their culture, their belief system, whatever. And I say this is global in terms of I've had people from all over the world, even those that don't speak English, explain to me they had experiences. You can have lawyers, doctors, nurses, social workers. You can have farmers, children, housewives. It really doesn't matter what their profession is. It doesn't matter what age they are. It doesn't matter what culture they are. It doesn't matter what they do or don't believe. And that's really, really important here because many people believe that they're all Star Trek fanatics and sci-fi buffs and all the rest of it. And many will come to me and say, I've never even looked at a sci-fi movie. I'm not interested. I've never believed that there are such things as extraterrestrials. So this is not about belief. This is about a real experience that has created an understanding or a belief ultimately that this is real. So, this, again, people say, well, you're a believer. These are only become believers through their actual experience, not because they choose to.
Very interesting. I hear what you're saying. So it's based on experiences they've had and conclusions that they might not have even wanted to draw initially, but have to because they're confronted with the reality of the situation.
Exactly.
Okay. Do people seek your services for other non-ET related experiences? Just what might be considered more standard kind of therapy?
Yes, in the sense that it may be not necessarily connected to extraterrestrial contact, but people who are having maybe other strange experiences, like we would call paranormal, psychic experiences or whatever. What's interesting is often it may actually connect to experiences that they haven't realized were extraterrestrial, because when we're talking about contact or experiences, we're talking about physical non-human intelligences, interdimensional, extra-dimensional, trans-dimensional, and even some from our future. So we're not just talking about one intelligence here. The interesting thing is somebody may come who's more religious, for example, and they may say, oh, I keep seeing this angel, and this angel comes and tells me things or whatever. In somebody else's belief system, that would be a light being or an energy being. Actually, they're
Right.
often the same. It's just the lens that they are looking through. And so when someone comes to me, it may be that more religious lens where they're saying, they'll talk about maybe ascended masters or Jesus or whatever. And sometimes that may be that's how they interpret it. But with someone else, it may be some higher being or some light being or something like that. So I need to know their belief system and work through their belief system so that they're able to connect the dots of what's actually going on with them.
Right. Okay. Yeah. That's like the symbolic layer that they're interpreting the encounter through. That makes complete sense. And I was going to mention to you that the role of a shaman is that of an intermediary between the land of the living and the land of the dead. And I suggest that some of your clients find themselves on somewhat of a shamanic path with you as their guide. What are your thoughts on this observation, please?
I think that's a good analogy. What we've discovered with the Dr. Edgar Mitchell Free Foundation, when we did all the surveys with 4,200 people, 600 questions, 10 countries, was something very fascinating that leads into the shamanic side of it. What we discovered was this, that 75% of them believed that it was their consciousness, not their physical body, that was having interactions with these intelligences. Only 25% was physical. That's why
Wow.
it makes it very hard for ufologists that are nuts and bolts to actually get a handle on it, because people are not bringing back bits of the craft or whatever. So 75% literally is out of body. So you've got a whole new level of how do we interpret consciousness, and consciousness being primary to this experience.
Okay, that's really fascinating. Now, I've had my own astral projection, so I absolutely know that's real. And you mentioned astronaut Dr. Edgar Mitchell. Now, he was a Freemason, that's well known. And Freemasonry is a mystical or Gnostic organization that's highly aware of esoteric and interdimensional phenomena and principles. Could you share with us how you met astronaut Dr. Edgar Mitchell and how you came to be involved in his Free Foundation, please?
Well, actually, let's put it like this. The history of that is that I was contacted by Ray Hernandez, who's actually an attorney, and telling me about his experiences. And there was a delay of me responding because I didn't get his email till 6 months after he sent it. And I won't go into that because that's another quite weird one. But when we connected, he then said, I've got this information that I need to start something up, some kind of looking at the science, because he'd been profoundly affected by his experience with his wife when their dog was sick, and they saw this light being, and then the dog was healed. And
Yeah.
it was profound. And he said, I need to speak to others, particularly those within the scientific world. I was friends and knew Dr. Rudy Shield, the astrophysicist. I had known him for a number of years. So I said to Ray, I'll connect you to Dr. Rudy Shield. Rudy kindly, within 24 hours, connected with Ray Hernandez and said, I know Dr. Edgar Mitchell. I'm going to connect you with him. And fortunately, Dr. Edgar Mitchell wasn't very far away in distance from where Ray Hernandez lived. And Ray ended up then going and meeting him several times. And
Wow.
when he said to Dr. Edgar Mitchell and Rudy Shield, this is what I'm being told I need to do, is look at the science and the from the consciousness angle. Dr. Edgar Mitchell then agreed to be part of what we call the Dr. Edgar Mitchell Free Foundation. So the four of us were the founders, the co-founders of the Free organization. And from that, of course, has led to this amazing research. And one of the things I will add to this, because it was so affirming of my book, which was talking about, awakening to your experiences and how it can transform your life. One of the most fascinating responses to how people changed after their experiences, 85% of those, 4,000, said they had a psycho-spiritual transformation. So there was no doubt that in a majority of cases, this was seen as benevolent.
Wow. Now, this is such important work you're doing, Mary. Now, my co-host here, Mike, works as a MUFON investigator in LA. Mike, you got some thoughts on what we've been discussing so far? It's absolutely fascinating.
I do, and I'm proud to be working with MUFON, but I also just want to toss out there this is completely separate from that, and I'm not speaking on behalf of them here. These are all my personal opinions. But I did want to ask a little bit. In a way, you answered the question I was going to ask before I asked it, but I wanted to go into it a little bit more because in our last episode with Dr. Joanna Kiyawa, she was talking about the liminal space and, the difference between a spiritual experience versus a possible UFO experience. And she presents the idea like, does it have to be completely material to be completely real? And essentially the answer to that question for her is no. And it sounds like you're saying something very similar, where a majority of people, because I was essentially going to ask you what percentage of your clients or patients are having physical experiences versus potentially non-physical experiences. If we can go into that a little bit more, that is something I personally find very fascinating.
I think, first of all, I'd like to say that what we've discovered with which is now the Consciousness and Contact Research Institute, it's changed since we've changed it from the Dr. Edgar Mitchell Free Foundation, because we're getting more scientists in, and that seemed to be a better title. What we discovered was that those that have had near-death experiences, those that have had remote viewing experiences, those that have had shamanic experiences, or gone on a shamanic journey, or those that had certain types of energy healing experiences, etc. Ultimately, whether or not they're aware of it, often that catapults their consciousness into the realm where they will not only connect with what they would term perhaps angels, spirit guides or whatever, but non-human, extraterrestrial or interdimensional intelligences. So in fact, it can be a vehicle from whatever the experience is on the ground, if you like, to access all of that, all the above. So it isn't necessarily, as some want to put it into boxes and say, well, that's the spiritual and that's the UFO stuff. No, we found it's all in the same bucket, if you like. It's just that the interpretation, a perspective of the individual will interpret it in a certain way, because often they're more comfortable if they're, working metaphysically or spiritually. They may be happy to think, well, it's angels or it's ascended masters. Well, actually, they can be same. They can be light beings. They can be many of the intelligences, but coming in a form that is, if you like, comfortable for their psyche, comfortable for their awareness. And when I work with someone who is going into hypnosis and they are seeing some of these beings, they'll connect then to that being a source of their information, their downloads, as we call it, where they know, as I'll say in my questionnaire, have you got any, do you often have information in your head that you've not consciously learned? And 9 times out of 10, they'll say, yeah, I found myself knowing about this and being absolutely driven to find out about astronomy or quantum physics or free energy, and finding myself knowing things. And how do I know them? I don't know how I know them. And often they want to know the actual source of that. And that's where, as I was saying with Stuart, I can facilitate their connection to feeling more confident about who it is that's working with them. And that's part of the way that I facilitate it, if you like. It is a kind of shamanic journey, because it's assisting them to have confidence in what is their source of information. Who is that? Who is that that's giving you that information? Has it got integrity? Is it useful to you? Is it helpful? And if the answer is yes, 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 well, then expand on that so that you can actually become more confident of the source of what you're getting.
Mary, really want to honor and respect the role you're playing in raising our collective consciousness and supporting people. I really mean that. Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, and likewise for me as well. So on this same lane, as it were, I want to throw out something there that I just want to sort of put it out into the public, and I'm not sure if you really have an answer for it, Mary, but I've asked a couple people, individually, privately about this, and they've all found it fascinating. So I want to just put it out there. But one of the things that I've personally postulated is with the idea of physical versus non-physical, and also abductions. When I hear stories about people going through the window, through the wall, through the roof and such, I really wonder, and then sometimes they'll come back with like markings on their body and whatnot. I really have to wonder, is that a physical experience, or is it at all possible that it's either like whether you want to call it an astral body or a light body being taken out of the physical body, something happens and then it gets put back in, and if that's what it is it possible that the mark could appear on the physical body while being done to one of these non-physical, I don't know if that makes any sense, but that's kind of the thought that I wanted to put out there.
Mike, it's a good question, and I'll go into a very recent hypnosis I did. What I have discovered is when there are bruises or marks, that usually is because the physical body has been taken. And interestingly, only recently, a lady came to me who had a triangular mark on the base of her spine, and some other phenomena. And she wanted to know what that was. And in hypnosis, actually discovered that that was an energy transfer that happened on board craft. Now, I'm going to take this to another level because I know that there are those that work with hypnosis and help people find whether or not they've had experiences or not. And sometimes there's no memory other than the fact that they saw a light outside the window and nothing else. And when you take them into hypnosis, and the subconscious, of course, records everything without editing. We know that. That's why Dr. John Mack said he trusted hypnosis more than conscious memory, because conscious memory edits out what it doesn't like, whereas subconscious doesn't edit anything out. In fact, it is a true record of the experience, and that's what Dr. John Mack, and I concur with that. But one of the things, this gets back to what you were saying, Stuart, as well, is where do I facilitate that extra level? When you take somebody in hypnosis back to an experience, and they'll see themselves maybe floating, going in a space, round walls or whatever, and they'll describe what they're seeing in front of them, whether or not they're laying down, standing up or whatever. And then I will say, is there any presence around you or whatever? And they'll say, oh, there's 3, perhaps. What do they look like? And you'd get them to describe it. The next level is they want to know why. Why me? What's it all about? Why have they taken me up on the craft? You know, all these important questions, which I get them to tell me what they're seeking before I take them into hypnosis. So I've got those questions to hand. And when they're in talking about what they're seeing, I often say to them, and it's primary, is do any of these beings look familiar to you? And many, many times they will say, oh, yes, this one to the right. So I said, so that's the one I want you to talk to, or I want you to inquire with, and say something like, how many times has this happened to me, for example? And immediately they'll come out with 2, 5, 7, you know, and go on the number of ages, or many, many times or whatever. So you've got a communication going. And once you've got that communication going, then you can ask these other questions. Why am I here this time? And it will be often a medical procedure. They're checking me out, or they're saying that I've got a problem and they're having to deal with that. Right, do you want to know more information? Yes, I do. I want to know about this. So you get a dialogue going in that space, in that, if you want to call it a shamanic space, because they can dialogue with the beings and get the answers. You know, they can ask about their children. They can ask about, you know, what's their connection to those intelligences. And sometimes what will surprise them is, well, their family. Why is that? Because they've got more of their DNA added to their own DNA, or as sometimes happens, one of their children is an upgrade or a hybrid, and they'll be told that. They may be told that they've got children on the craft, and then they'll recognize the fact that they have, because they've been taken to see them. So they get exposed to a huge understanding of the role they're playing within that greater matrix. And even though that can be very confronting sometimes, in many ways, it resonates with them on that deeper level. So my job really is to assist them to get their understanding, to connect the dots. And as they do that, when they come out of it, that recording also will continue to work, because I will send them that recording. And when they listen to it again, more information then will come spontaneously to them. So it acts as a trigger to more information because of the frequency that's in there. So what I'm really doing is just facilitating a space that's safe for them to get their own answers, and you know, and to question where they need to question, so that ultimately it's about helping them to connect the dots. That's really the role that I have, so that they can then decide whether they want to believe it or not believe it. And sometimes it takes a while, especially if they've been so unconscious. There's only about 20% that go somnambulistic. But if they do go completely out, then when they come and listen to it, they will struggle sometimes to say, I don't know if I can believe that. And one of my answers to that is, well, do you think if I asked you to create a scenario, you would have created that kind of scenario, in your imagination? And generally they'll say, not in a million years, not in a million years. So that is up to them then, whether they decide to believe it or not believe it. But ultimately, that is what they've come out with.
Now, I'm trying to understand this, so and this might sound a bit like devil's advocate, but when they go back into that hypnotic space, are they extrapolating and just making up, filling in, is their mind filling in the gaps, or are they somehow unpacking stuff they already learnt during that experience?
Interestingly, it seems to be that once you've actually activated that openness to their subconscious, they then tap back into that. And it's the different, and let me explain it this way, because people don't always understand the difference between what you're getting from your subconscious and your imagination, because there's a very, very big difference.
Yeah.
When I describe taking somebody into hypnosis so they know the difference, I will say like this: with your left brain, you think before you speak. In right brain subconscious, you speak before you think.
Yeah.
You shut down left brain. Now, how is that different to imagination? It's very easy. For example, I say to people, think of your bedroom. Because your bedroom's real, you know where the bed is, you know where the window is, you know where the door is, because it's a reality. It's in your mind's eye right away. Okay? If I said to you, create a bedroom, you'd have to think to create it. You'd have to think, well, how big would it be? Where would I put the bed? Where would I put the window? Where would I put the door? It's a thinking process. So when you're working in hypnosis, the answers literally come spontaneously without thought. There's no chance for thought in there. They will say, it's this, and this, and this, as I've asked the question. Often it's almost instant. There is no time for thought, because I will say to them, if you let your thinking in, it's going to edit. It's going to say, well, you can't say that.
That's true.
You can't say that. You can't say that because that's not possible. So it's really important they know the difference of allowing that information in directly, so the left brain doesn't get a look in, if you like, because as soon as that happens, it starts to edit. And they get to know the difference, because they'll say, oh, 7's right in my head right away. That's not thought. That is the download. That is them tapping into that part of their subconscious. That's the difference.
Okay, that's very important, because that's how we function as artists too. Because when we're getting inspiration for a song, a piece of art, if we let the other part of our brain interfere, it starts editing parts out and saying, no, that's no good. I don't want that. I don't want that. It's the same in remote viewing, because I did try a bit of that, and I've listened to some people speak about that. So if you let that other part of your brain interfere, it'll start changing, extrapolating, editing. So I understand exactly what you're saying there. Thank you for the clarification there.
I think it's important, because a lot of those criticize hypnosis and say, oh, they're imagining it and what have you. Not only is it often beyond their imagining when they come out with information and using words they never use. I mean, they've used, maybe occasionally they'll use a really long term for something and say, is that a word? And it will be, but they don't even know of it. So often it's information completely different to their personal knowing. Even star systems, they'll come out with a star system and say, is that a star? And they won't even know, but it will be. So that, you can check out the data. So I say it's like, it's easy, it's hard, but it's easy. It's hard to shut down left brain, but it's easy because you don't have to think.
Now, these states seem as delineated to me as a waking state and a dream state. So when I'm trying to remember a dream, I might remember a fragment of that dream, but the rest is elusive. In a regression, could I remember a dream? Is there a relationship? Am I on the right track there somehow?
The interesting thing with dreams is there are those that are interpreted as dreams, but are actually not dreams, are an experience. There are those that we are, obviously assimilating the day's events or whatever, that type of dream. There are dreams, I think, where we actually go to other realities, parallel realities, other timelines where people will see themselves in making different choices and this kind of thing as well. There are dreams where they believe they've been on a spacecraft and say, oh, well, that was a dream. And they said it was really interesting. It felt very real and what have you. And I'll say, when did you have the dream? And they'll say, oh, about 10 or 15 years ago. And I said, and you still remember it?
Wow.
No, come on, that's not a dream. And then when you go into it, they realize it wasn't a dream. But one of the other things I think why consciousness is primary here is to understand that there may be aspects of ourselves in other realities that we're tapping into, in the same way time is not linear, the same way we supposedly remember past lives. When Whitley Strieber talked about his 9 lessons in the secret space school, where he actually saw that everything was happening now. So we've got to really reframe what is consciousness and what is possible with consciousness, because I don't think we've even begun to tap into actually what's going on from that perspective.
Have you had people from aerospace or intelligence or from the military come to you to try and unravel this mystery? And I mean both on 2 levels, as individuals and as in their role as people within those paradigms.
Occasionally, but not very often, that they've said a little bit about that they used to be involved, or they might have been involved at some point. But what's more interesting to me is when I'm working with somebody whose father was in the military, or their family's always been in the military, and they've been brought up on one of the bases, and they've had experiences, and then they've discovered that their parent has been involved in some of the more darker stuff that goes on with the Milab. And I'm sure your listeners know a little bit about the military abductions and what have you as well, where they've been in programs that are part of the Milab as well, or been indoctrinated on other levels in bases and what have you. And that often can come out when we're exploring an experience, not expecting it necessarily, but it's actually come out and been exposed numbers of times. And their trauma has mostly been from those experiences rather than their experiences with the non-human intelligences. And that's really interesting, because there's a lot of information now to say that some of the beings that they're seeing through the Milab are programmed life forms. They're not actually the ETs at all, but they're programmed life forms from the military that are creating fear in those individuals and what have you. And there's lots of accounts, and I've come across quite a lot in my work, where we would see them going up on this craft where it's real ET interactions, but also in underground bases where they've seen human doctors, but they've also seen these programmed life forms, which can be greys, can be reptilians, for example. And sometimes, and one interesting experience from a lady was that she was on a table in an underground base, and there was a huge picture of a mantis projected above her and being told that they were evil. So she was being programmed to believe that the mantis beings were actually evil. So there's a really dark program here, and it's extremely complex. And I don't pretend to be any sort of expert on that, but I do know that the ones that seem to be the most traumatized are the ones that have had those kinds of experiences.
Very interesting.
Wow. I kind of feel like I need to chime in here, because now we're a pre-recorded show. We're a couple episodes in advance. The episode that's actually dropping right now as we're recording this one is when we have another guest on talking about briefly about the military abduction aspect, and I just jump right in. It's like, that's not true, it can't be true, it's criminal. But I've definitely heard the concept a bunch of times, and I really don't know what to make of it, but now that you're saying some things that I've never heard of before about it, and that's why I wanted to chime in and talk a little bit more about it, because I was A, so dismissive of it in a previous episode, but B, what would be like, what do you think the end goal of that would be? Like, why would somebody, I'm assuming that these folks would have to be on the military base already for this to happen, but then what's the end game for that? Why go through all of that effort to try to make somebody think that they encountered a non-human, and like an alien essentially, when in fact they have not? Like, what's the point of all that? Because you said darker stuff, so
yeah, Okay, Mike. Well, none of us want to think that this is, man's inhumanity to man, in the sense. Um, and there's a wonderful book that you can't really get now by Dr. Lama, My Lab, and it all is about um, abducting humans, and they have the technology. There's a wonderful book, Facing the Shadow, Embracing the Light, by Niara Isley, who was experienced all of this. And it was through body work she found out that she was actually a radar specialist in the military, but they actually abducted her, and she was taken underground, and she was drugged, interrogated, and she talks about how this all unfolded for her in terms of the experience. What Dr. Lama is saying, and many others are saying, is the military want to know what happens on the craft. What are they taught? What's the technology? What's the end game? All this kind of information. The best people to get for that are the people who've had experiences, because they can take them, they can hypnotize them and drug them, and they can then find out exactly what's happening on the craft. So they want to find out exactly what the end game is with all these different intelligences, and that's one way to do it. The reason that they get so traumatized and so confused is so that if they ever talk about it, they're not going to be believed. Who's going to believe that? I mean, it's that, as you struggle to believe it. Most people say, oh, they're off their head. There's something really wrong with them. They're paranoid. They're all those kind of things. And this is why they get away with it, because nobody's ever going to want to believe that this is actually real and it actually goes on. But there is no doubt that it's real, and there's no doubt it goes on. And the other thing is the covert agencies within the military or whoever that are doing this, they know they're safe because nobody's ever going to believe these people if they ever talk about it. Nobody's again, because it's so outrageous and so awful that no one's actually going to believe it. So that's what protects them. But it's more about them gaining information and making sure when they get it that the person doesn't talk about what's happened to them, because it's so unbelievable to most people. I've now come across many, many, many people that have had both experiences. And there's no question the greatest trauma generally has been from the human abductions, because they have the technology, and they don't have to be in the military base. They have the technology that the ETs have got to actually pick people up, and they can do that. So this is the technology we're not told about, that's 30 years, maybe 100 years to 1,000 years ahead of us. They've got a lot of this technology that we're not told about. That they've got technology that we're not told about, to do with free energy, to do with healing, to do with a whole range of things that we're not given access to because of lots of socioeconomic reasons, where the less we have, the better, and the more we pay for it, the better. So there's that big agenda. It just keeps growing when you start to say, well, why are they doing this? Because they want to have the control, they want to have the information, and the less the general public know, the better. The weird thing is, when this goes into cloning, this goes into a whole range of moving consciousness from one form to another. And to give you an example of that, and this again it seems quite amazing. When I was talking to one young lady about her experiences, she saw herself on board a craft, but she wasn't in a human body. She was actually in a Zeta gray body as a scientist, working as a scientist. And she says, so I said to her, so how do you get back to your human body on board craft? Because she had explained that she was in that. And then she described a ball of light leaving the Zeta body, really being enfolded again in a human container or a human body. And she said that's how she moves her consciousness back into her human body. But she was working on the craft in a different form. Now you'd think, oh, well, that's really weird. Maybe that's just her imagination. When you have an 8-year-old tell you that his family is the mantis beings, and when he dies, he's going back to being a mantis, and explain when he's on board craft sometimes, he will move he evaporates, he calls it, into a mantis form for a while, and then comes back to his human form. This is an 8-year-old describing how his consciousness just moves into another form for a time. That's just 2 examples, one a child and one an adult, saying, so when their consciousness goes up onto the craft and they say, I was shown how to fly a spacecraft, It may be that they're going into another avatar to fly the spacecraft and then come back to their human one. And we see all these images of balls of light, don't we, in people's photographs and what have you. What do you think some of them might be?
Well, yeah, that's
Yeah.
I see lights in the sky like almost every day now, and it's almost always impossible to say what exactly it is unless it does something really crazy, right? But so now this sounds like, just for clarification, what you're describing right now would be more of the non-physical nature of an experience, as it were, right? Where sort of what.
But the consciousness, I remember one regression I did where the lady, she had about 3 pages of questions. And I thought, I'm supposed to get through this in a couple of hours. This is going to be interesting, you know, quite a challenge. She went onto the craft, and then she said, they're moving my consciousness from my brain, because they're working on my brain, and they want just to work on my brain. So my consciousness is going somewhere else. So please don't speak to me for a while, because I'm going somewhere else. So I'm sitting there in silence, waiting for me to actually start the questioning and what have you. And then she says to me, well, I'm back. And I says, well, I've got all these questions now that you want answered. And she says, don't waste your time. She says, because I don't need them now. I know all I
Wow.
need to know. And that was the end of it.
Wow.
So whatever it was she needed to know was when they'd moved her consciousness somewhere else and were working on her brain. Now you make of that what you will, but that was an interesting one where they were actually separating the consciousness from the human vehicle.
I read about those types of themes in Dr. Carl Turner's work as well. I've seen that motif before. It's very interesting. And you know what? That comes up in Gnosticism about trapping souls in bodies, and it's viewed through a somewhat negative lens. Not all Gnostics view it that way. Now, have you explored that about these ancient mystery schools being aware of this type of knowledge?
Yes, as a researcher, you find yourself going in all different directions, don't you? From
Mm,
ancient archaeology to ancient history to theology, shamanism, you name it, you know, metaphysics. You look at a whole range of things. And I think, and I'm sure you do too, Stuart, in terms of trying to understand what's actually going on, you find yourself being led in all sorts of different areas of knowledge and looking to see if you can connect the dots and what have you. And what is, it's all there, isn't it, in
yeah.
different language and what have you, which helps to validate these experiences. Because for me, it's the experiential that I'm coming across when I'm working with people in altered states, where I'm working with their awareness and what have you. It's taken me into some interesting journeys. And one of them was looking for the tangibility of it so that I can actually ground it in my own head or whatever, for example. And I'll give you an example that I still can't explain, with a very aware lady wanting to get answers to a question. And we were using the old-fashioned tape recorders then. This is some years ago now. And the tape recorder is, you know, it's old-fashioned, but it works well. And I was taking her in, and she said, I think I'm going to another dimension. And this is all on the tape. And she's going into it and describing this other dimension from, you know, my office. What was fascinating was, did it ultimately she go to the other dimension or not? And what she rang me up literally within hours and said, on the tape recorder, Mary, because I used to play music as I took people into their altered state. She said, it starts where I say I'm going into another dimension. The frequency of my voice completely changes and gets to a high pitch. She said, but the music's normal, your voice is normal, mine's gone to a different pitch. Then she says, Mary, your voice goes to a different pitch along with mine, but the music stays the same,
Okay.
exactly the same. So she said, I think you came with me or whatever. Now, make of that what you will, but
Wow.
those kind of things really are quite fascinating. What was
Very.
that saying? Was I really going to? And I will say to you, and I think Stuart will understand, that when you go into these states, you get information too. And
Mm,
I found that when I'm working with someone, sometimes I find myself getting into that frequency as well and tapping into what they're getting. And this has been very helpful, because what it means is I can understand more of what's going on for them. And I think Stuart knows what I'm talking about here, is that the more you open up with others, you start to open up yourself, and you find yourself tapping into things and getting insights that you that just help with the process. Let's put it like that.
Oh, most certainly. And one of the things I was getting at with an earlier question is I basically see you as a shaman, leading other people, guiding, supporting other people on this journey. And that's what I've got major respect for you on that level. Thank you so much. In fact, another question I had for you is in the movie The Matrix, Morpheus tells Neo, this is the exact quote he says, there's a difference between knowing the path and walking the path. And I can tell you most certainly have gained a lot of knowledge on this topic. And forgive me if this is a question you don't want to answer or it's too personal, but do you personally have a spiritual practice or tradition that you follow? And has this been informed by your work as a therapist?
Well, it's a good question, Stuart. And I would have been more reluctant years ago to have owned my own experience because I've not wanted to take away from the veracity and the interest of those that have, the standard, what I call classic kind of experiences. Mine's been more through spiritual practices, meditation, and I worked with my multidimensional awareness in a group for 3 years, where basically we did a lot of different things, from remote healing to opening up to source to understanding that. And that was actually very valuable to me, because after being brought up with a very traditional religious background, a lot of those things were seen to be unhealthy or not spiritual or dangerous and all those kind of things. What I discovered more than anything is that actually your multidimensional helps you understand the physical. But what helped me with my work, with opening up to that and knowing the difference between my left brain and my multidimensional source contact, was the very first time it showed in my work was when I was working with a graphic designer, a young man who went into a past life where he was a Zeta being, a gray being. And he said, and I'm moving something big from one dimension to another, like a creator being. He said, I'm moving something big from one dimension to the other. And as he said that, in my mind's eye, I saw it was a planet. And he said
Wow.
to me, literally afterwards, literally, as I'm thinking that, he's saying it's a planet and we've moved it too quickly and we've messed up its energy. And I'm thinking, oh my God, I got that before he even said it. What on earth is going on here? I asked him to draw it, actually, because he was a graphic artist. And he said, so we had to sort out its energy. But what that showed me then was that and it's something I've helped other hypnotherapists do that are open to it, is to work with their multidimensional selves. Because what you get, and I didn't mention that before, is I can tap into what's going to be the most helpful for that individual. So I'm going on the frequency that they're going on. So I can actually then perceive more of what's happening. So they may say, I'm seeing this, this, and this, and I'm getting insight is they need to look to the right. And I'll say, I need you to look all around, particularly to the right, because I'm being guided to guide them. So call that what you will, but it's like you're working on another level with their awareness. And once you open up to it, it actually is very natural. And it's something that I do without even thinking now. And I teach others how to do it, because it's actually really just connecting to your own source and your own confidence in that source. Primarily, it's something that I believe we're all born with, what we lose through programming and told it's not okay. So part of my work is to assist people to do that with confidence. But I learned it over 3 years.
Wow. Now that's very much like artists you're describing. So Mike and I have worked on music together, and we can feel a pull to create something together, collaboratively. And it's almost like there's something driving us or something that wants to emerge, and we're facilitating that happening. I find that very exciting. So a lot of these people, are they artists? Is that a predominant theme in the clients that come to you?
Lots of artists, lots of musicians,
Right.
lots of healers. And what it is many of them have opened up to a certain extent, but maybe not completely, because they may not know the source of their downloads. And when I say downloads, many of them, like you've experienced, will just get information or awareness or a feeling or a piece of artwork or a piece of music that just is there. They'll say, I'm just relaxing one day, and it just was just there.
Yeah.
Just right away, it was just there. And I call these downloads, and these downloads also come in the form of codes, scripts, strange writing, strange what I would call it scripts and codes that they don't always understand what they are, although they can understand some of them. They may come out with what we call light language or star language, which they just spontaneously comes as they're doing a healing or whatever as well. But also knowledge, information about what's going on the planet. You know, it may be quantum physics, it may be mathematics, it may be a whole range of things. And all of this is just, it's in my head, Mary. You know, I've never even been interested in maths. And now I'm getting all this information. The next thing they want to know is, where is it coming from? How do they access it? And some of them interpret it as their higher self, you know, their superconscious self. Others interpret it as from these intelligences or their angels, or, you know, they'll say it comes from a guardian angel or whatever. Part of the thing then is, okay, so do you want to know fully who that source is? And you can take them into a space where they can identify who that source is. And then they can actually have a conversation. So they can actually start questioning, because that's the next step that I believe these intelligences want from us, is to get to the point where we accept telepathy, we accept that we're telepathic beings, and that we can have an equal dialogue with them, is my sense. And I mean, I've had the experience of that myself. I have no recall of being on a board of craft, even though people have told me they've seen me on there. So whatever form I'm in, I don't remember them. But I do know how to access information from different sources intuitively, ask questions, and I ask them to verify it. And that's what I teach people to do, is to help them become confident with their connection to whatever that source is that they believe they're connected to, whether it's their guardian angel, you know, Jesus, or some other ascended being, or whatever it is. However they understand it, I'll work with their belief system so that they can be confident then and question and resonate or not resonate with the information. But people struggle with the codes, because I was talking to an Indigenous grandmother a few months ago, and she found herself doing all these strange scripts. And she says, I don't know what I'm doing, but they keep pushing me to do all these strange scripts. She says, the other ones, you know, she said the star ones. And when I looked at them, they were identical to many hundreds that I've been sent. And I said, these are the codes.
Whoa.
She said, these are codes. And she said, I didn't know what they were. And some of the codes are software for the new awakened human. Some of them are information. Some of them can't be translated at the moment. And some of them can actually, I've got a video of a young 7-year-old talking light language to another child, and they're talking to each other in light language. They understand each other.
Wow. When you say software to you know, the upgraded human, can you elaborate on that? What exactly are you talking about? Like something to put into like an AI machine, or are you talking something that can tweak the physical biological clumps that are us? What do you mean by that?
Like, okay, I'll tell you how I've come to understand it. First of all, remember, I was a nurse midwife, not, you know, hundreds of years ago, but I still look at the science, because the science is really important to help ground this information so that you can actually see how it works. We do know now, I mean, Dr. Francis Crick and many others have said that they believe we're intelligently designed. And we went from Cro-Magnon, Neanderthal, missing link, then Homo sapiens sapiens with twice the brain size and 223 genes that were a sideways insertion of genetic material. So there's enough there. There's plenty more than that. That's just a brief overview of some of the work that I've looked at in terms of DNA. So we are told that maybe as many as at least 12, but as many as 22 different species are part of our heritage. Now, they're all involved with us and have been. They were seen as gods in the past. I believe all of those that were gods were actually, you know, just these intelligences that appeared like gods because of their technology, etc. Now, we do know that those that understand DNA, that we've got only 10%, 5 to 10% activated of our DNA. The rest they've called junk litter, because they don't actually know what it is. They don't know what it does or anything else. I believe that that's the part of us that hasn't been yet activated to give us the abilities that our progenitors have put in our DNA. And I can go into that in a little bit, but the bottom line is that what we need to understand is that 1 gram of DNA can absorb as much information as is on the internet now. 1 gram of DNA.
Whoa.
Now just think about how much DNA we've got that we don't even know what's in that DNA. Okay, if 1 gram can take that much information, there is the understanding that all of our awareness is in our DNA right from the very, very beginning. Maybe even the Akashic records, as they call them, maybe that's all there. When that gets activated, we're going to be a completely different human. And this is what these codes, these light languages, these frequencies, the artwork that we're seeing that triggers information and what have you. All of that, I believe, is part of this activation where more and more people are becoming more intuitive, opening up to their intuitive abilities and what have you. This is happening now. Frequencies from the sun, frequencies from the earth. They're talking about ascension. They're talking about awakening and what have you. So many people have contacted me that in the last few years have had extraordinary experiences, very 3D up to a certain point, lost all interest in 3D materialism, wanting to do things with the planet, interested in ecology, wanting to change their diet, wanting to be healers, wanting to make a new planet that is more holistic in every sense. This is the changes that I'm seeing daily. I'm getting emails all the time. So what is these codes coming in, these scripts? I believe some of them are software for the new awakened human. And to give you an example, one script, one symbol alone can contain as much information as a room full of encyclopedias in terms of multidimensionally. So what is it doing? Why is it there? If you've seen the movie Lucy, I don't know if you've seen the movie Lucy. It's all about a drug runner, and she is what they've done is put a special chemical, a new drug inside her that leaks. It's a very new drug that seems to activate something. This drug actually ends up activating her DNA. They didn't know that it did this, and as her DNA is activated, more and more of her becomes multidimensional, and she sees more till she actually becomes light at the very end of the film. What that's saying to me is, if our DNA gets activated, what kind of being are we going to be? What are we going to access? What are we going to understand? We're going to need new software for that upgraded human. And I believe these beings may very well be doing exactly that, making sure we have the software for the new computer. That's my own hypothesis. Might be completely crazy, but I suspect it might be possible that way. I don't know for sure. Some of the frequencies coming in are, if you like, eradicating some of the programs that trap us into 3D. You know how we're programmed into believing only our 5 senses work? And everything else is your intuition. Oh, yeah, imagination. Yeah, knowing, imagination. Everything's imagination, right? What they're doing is telling you not to trust any part of your multidimensional self. Whereas, in fact, we need that to translate and understand our 3D world. Without the multidimensional, you don't understand anything on the planet. That's why people get depressed, because they can't make any sense of their lives, because they're shut off from their multidimensional self. And we do that through education, through science. Everything's saying, oh, you can't trust anything except for your 5 senses. That's what we're programmed to believe. So we shut down. But what this is doing, these beings are doing now, is activating more of our multidimensional self, so we can actually start making sense of things again. And the children and the new generations are particularly good at doing that, because they're being born with awareness of their past lives. I mean, I'm talking to children that, a 7-year-old telling me that he comes from a blue planet, that he's come here to help with the ecology. A 10-year-old explaining to me he was blue in his previous life. He's come in and he's coming to connect to the planet to help with pollution on the planet. That's his mission. Another 7-year-old telling me that he comes from our future, that he's come to help with the planet as it is now. You can say they're all imagining it, or you may say they're telling the truth of how they understand their experience. I've got countless stories of children telling me that they're hybrids. One young girl telling me of 8 that she's a part water being, part human, and that she came from a water planet, and she's come in. She said that when she hears music, and you'll be interested in this, Stuart, when she hears music, she not only hears the music, but she follows the frequency to who created the music and their emotions and feelings as they created the music.
Ah,
So it's
okay.
completely,
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
yeah, I thought it would. Another 7-year-old says that she's a healer. She's part human, part blue avian. That they're her family, and that she's come in as a healer. And as a healer, she can heal, but she activates the healing in other people. 7 years old. These are the children that are coming in now and have been coming in that I talk about in The New Human. So this is testimony from children with no compromise in terms of where they got the information. The parents generally have told me there's no way we've said anything about anything to do with this, and this is what they're telling us. So this is coming in with an integrity that is very, very clear and honest from these children. And they're just saying how it is. This is how it is.
Maybe even pure, right? They're not tainted yet.
Exactly. And I've got about 9 chapters on the children and their awareness of where they come from, why they come to this planet, the space school where they go to learn how to do things. Even 3 and 4-year-olds talking about going out the window with their special friend who's got big black eyes, and they're learning all about cosmology, the true nature of the true origin of the species. One 8-year-old was so excited that 2 days previous, she said to me, she'd been taken on a spaceship to a planet to be shown how to levitate, how to use her third eye, and also being shown how they use mixed different species to go to other planets because they seed other planets in other universes as well as this galaxy. This is an 8-year-old.
Now, some of these themes have come up with some of the other people we've interviewed, and something I wanted to make sure I discussed with you today, Mary, is the Tic Tac. And I wanted to, so that's been revealed by the Pentagon. It was shown on CNN. The Pentagon said this is real. Now, have you seen more people come forward since then, or with more confidence since that revelation into the public consciousness?
Stuart, it's a really important one in the sense that what it's done is really generate a lot of interest in mainstream media looking into this. And I met Kevin Day, actually, the guy that talks about, a lovely, lovely gentleman, and it's changed his life completely.
Yeah.
He had his experiences, as you know. What that's done certainly is, as I say, generate more sincerity from mainstream news, where they're less likely to deride and mock those that are talking about it now. There's a respect that's come in from all of that. But what concerns me is they're still saying they don't know where they come from. They don't know anything about them, when of course they're lying through their teeth. So to me, the bottom line is they've got their own narrative, and they'll spin it however they choose to, and probably a darker narrative if anything. The people coming to me, though, are saying, now's the time, Mary. They're sort of intuitively being told it's time to start coming out. Some of them are writing their own books about their story and what have you. And these are, some of them are extremely credible professors, attorneys, a whole range of what we would see as very credible astrophysicists and what have you, psychologists, many psychologists and what teachers, different educators. I mean, the caliber of information, medical doctors. I've got a list of medical doctors that have had experiences and what have you as well. So the credibility is without question, but they seem to be, if you like, inspired to be more open with what's happening to them, almost like it's a timing thing, that it's time now. And I have always said it's disclosure from the ground up, that there's going to be so many overwhelming stories coming out that people will generally just take it as, yeah, this is real. And I think this is really what we're seeing now, is this huge movement to truth. Huge movement, especially given what's happened in the last few years. That's been a catalyst for many people because they've had time to think about their lives, what matters to them. And they've reassigned a whole new focus and perspective to what's important in their lives. And one of them is being truthful and saying, this is my life. I've got to own it now because this is who I am. So there's been a really important shift towards truth, which I think is wonderful, because the way that I look at it, the truth embargo has damaged and harmed not just thousands, not just millions, but perhaps billions of people who've had experiences, not known what they are, believed they were crazy, and ended up being medicated in a hospital. I would think there's been countless people that have believed in the end that there was something wrong with them, when in fact, if the truth had come out when it should have done, these people would have been able to own their experience, and we would be in a different situation today.
Wow, that's so insightful and so tragic for those people.
Yes.
I realized something earlier that the military are they're on the same line of inquiry as you are with your patients. Now, your patients are coming to you for your assistance, but it's opposite with the military. They're trying to take these people and extract the information. Okay, we want to understand what's happening. Is there some advantage we can gain here? Because if you're being downloaded with technical information, then we want access to that. So I can understand, even though the story sounds kind of preposterous, I could understand what the motive might be for those people, and to also then want to hide that information so it can become only their information, not the collective's.
That's exactly right. So there's a danger to coming out and saying you're having these experiences, because if you're getting information on free energy, for example, as one example, plasma physics, I've got, some that have got in touch with me, and it's way beyond my understanding in terms of science. So I try as much as possible to connect them to others. But you see, the internet isn't infallible in the sense that those that have got darker intentions will be looking for that. I'll give you an example of a gentleman in England that was telling me that he's in contact with a particular species of intelligences, and they'll tell him when they're coming, and a portal will open. And he said, so I've always, I always know when they're going to come. He says, the trouble is now, he says, the military know that I do that. And so whenever I get that particular thought and the craft are coming through, the aircraft are waiting because they know that it's coming through me. So this is the downside, if you like, is with the military knowing how it all works, they can access this information from many, many experiences. And that's why often they get picked up and abducted, because of the same reason. But in the military is because they know they've got information that they want. And it can be all of those things from, great higher technology and whatever. So getting the safety for that for somebody is really hard. And you have to be, I'm not geared for that kind of thing. I can't protect people. I haven't got any technical expertise in any way. My job primarily is to help people to work through whatever experiences and make sense of them, integrate them in a way they want to and choose to understand it. My job, I haven't got any of the other technical expertise, so I have to send where I think it's safe. I've got lots of different contacts and say, well, you can talk to this scientist over here that's open to this, or you can, as much as possible. But there is an enormous number of people that are scared to admit they have this information because they know they'll be targeted. And this is, again, this gets back to man's inhumanity to man, because it's man that's doing it. And that's the problem.
Just a quick question. This is a legitimate question for me, but I also sort of feel like anyone listening might have this question too. And so if the military, and I'm, whether it be United States or Australia or any military, were to have this kind of technology to be able to know that someone can do something like what you're talking about, and then a non-human craft can come through such that they could have their own craft to intercept it, why would they also not use that for the betterment? And let's say like there's conflict in the world right now. Why not use that technology to, I don't know how to say it nicely, but eradicate the problem and eliminate that conflict so that we can all sort of live happily ever after? I think I sort of know the answer, but I wanted to put that out there because I feel like people listening would maybe want to ask that, but I also legitimately have that question myself.
Mike, I would agree with you. Wouldn't it be wonderful if all of this was for the benefit of mankind, and that we could actually trust those that are in these positions of power? But anyone who's looked into anything on this planet now, from the New World Order, etc., to how everything's been controlled for many thousands of years. Ultimately, when you go back and you see how it's all being controlled, you then get a better understanding of it's not been about humankind thriving. It's been about a certain percentage having total control. And this sounds, I know, very tin hat, conspiratorial, and all the rest of it. But all I can say is look at the, research openly and look at the evidence and say, where does that lead you? And all you see is there's been, whenever you look at what could happen if we had the technology, for example, the healing technology that is apparently they already have, things like the med beds and what have you, the free energy technology, how this could change mankind. Just think of what would happen if the public knew that we didn't need fossil fuels, for example. The public knew that we'd had this free energy technology for almost 100 years, and it's not been given to them because there's profit has been more important to those that control everybody else and what have you. So it's about, why is that? Because there's a certain percentage of the population, call them what you want, that want to control everybody else. And ultimately, it isn't about the benefit of mankind. It's about them being okay and having a certain percentage of people on the planet that they think is okay. And the rest of us really are not important. What's behind that, whether or not that's another intelligence behind them, is possible. But I don't know. The trouble is we don't know. We only know that generally everything is being geared to eliminate a certain number of the population and generally not take care of the rest of them other than under a certain control. Now that's all out there now. Anyone who wants to look into it and how everything has been orchestrated, and I'm not going to get into all the conspiratorial stuff, whether it's big pharma and all the rest of it, but I do my homework and I look at the scientists that are credible. And this is the important thing that people don't realize. I think just because you're into the multidimensional, the UFO, whatever name you want to give it, the paranormal, the supernatural, or whatever it is, ultimately you also have to ground that in tangible science and information. And that's been really important to me, to be, like the DNA. So what is it about the DNA that's so important? Well, actually, there's a great deal that it tells us about who we are and these intelligences. For example, who are these gods that we've venerated over I'll give you an example. In my book, The New Human, there's an Indian boy, should I say young adult, a young Indian young adult that wrote to me saying to me, Mary, I'm a starseed. I know I'm a starseed. He said, but all my fellow countrymen, my relatives, my family have about 100 gods. And he said, and they worship them regularly every day. But he says, how can I tell them that they're worshipping extraterrestrials? They won't get it because they don't understand. So that tells you everything. We have been geared into worshipping these intelligences that have come to our planet with this technology, thinking they're gods. Where does that take religion? I won't go there because I think you can extrapolate from that. So you get caught up, and I know, Stuart, you'll understand as well that the implications of all of that mean you've really got to reappraise everything you've ever learned, everything you've ever been taught, and basically start again. And that's huge for most people. And some people are not going to want to do it. It's like, I always say, if a UFO lands on someone's front lawn, there's going to be 10% of people that say it's a fire engine because they do not want to go there.
No, they'll experience the dark night of the soul. And I've had that experience. Now, I won't go into the details, but for about 3 days, it felt like I was untethered, floating in space. There was no up or down, no north or south, and I had to reevaluate everything. And it's very shocking, but I'm very glad I went through it. It's a transitional stage.
It's one of the things that the reason I wrote Awakening was a manual, because so many people had nowhere to go with their experiences. How do I know it's real? What do I do about the fear? What if it's happening to my children? I've got implants. What are they? Missing pregnancies, all the kinds of things that I was constantly being asked. You go to the traditional, conventional psychologist or psychiatrist, heaven forbid, and you then start talking about these experiences, what's going to happen? Most of
Mhm.
the time, you know full well what's going to happen. So they have nowhere to go. Some UFO groups are more open, some are not. Some have the tech, somebody there is a therapist or that may be able to help them with hypnosis or whatever. So the only thing I could do was put something together that would give people a step-by-step manual to their awakening, and then to start to understand multidimensional downloads that they may get, whether they're getting a connection to different star systems, for example. Some people will say to me, I believe my family comes from the Pleiades or Andromeda or Sirius or whatever. What gives people that knowing, that sense, unless there's some very tangible reason why that is? Because these are everyday people. These are, as I say, they're the ones that you see wandering around the supermarket, getting their groceries, but having all these experiences, and it's like they're living two lives. I remember a wonderful lady experiencer saying to me, Mary, I work in a dress shop. And she said, and some nights I'm out all night having these experiences and what have you, and I feel absolutely blitzed the next morning. And she said, and I go to work feeling terrible. And she said, and if they say to me, why are you feeling terrible? I can't say, well, I was out on a spaceship all last night, and this is the reason I'm feeling absolutely knackered. You can't say that, can you? Because they don't understand. This is my point. It's all this extended reality. And for many people, it's very isolating because they may have a partner that may not cope with it, or be too fearful of it, or not want to hear about it, or relatives that think there's something wrong with you. So they end up being very isolated and very alone. And that in itself is part of the problem, is again to do with the truth embargo, because people generally are not educated to understand this is an absolute reality.
Now, Mary, I saw a show on television here called My Mum Talks to Aliens,
Oh,
and it
yes, yes.
featured yourself and your son. And Mike, this show was shown on mainstream television over here. Absolutely fascinating. Now, what were the ramifications of that? That must have put you on a lot of people's radars. And how is your son, your relationship with him these days?
Oh, look, my relationship with my son is absolutely fine. We had an agreement that whatever went on there, that wouldn't affect our respect and love for one another. So that was always in the mandate. He did his role well, and it was to help those that really are struggling to understand an experience that they haven't had, and how confronting that can be and what have you. So in that sense, it's not a problem. I think they were absolutely overwhelmed with responses from the public. I think 1,000 phone calls within a certain number of hours or whatever. It was absolutely
Wow.
huge, really huge. And that was the reason I did it, despite the fact that Charlie Lineweaver, the American astrophysicist, treated it as a joke. The
Hmm.
numbers of people that were so angry with him, he would have got a lot of really negative energy, I can tell you right now, apart from myself, because smoke, you didn't see it other than maybe energetically, smoke was coming out of my ears because I was so cross, because he didn't treat it respectfully as we hoped he would. It was to actually demonstrate, the reason I did it was to demonstrate the struggle people have having these experiences and having no one accept or believe them because of the denial in mainstream education, science, and all the rest of it, the mainstream news, the whole denial of the reality. So it really gave people something, a validation. But not only that, many of them told me they played it to their family and got their family to see what they're experiencing because of the denial or the fear
Wow.
or whatever. So it's proved to be, and I know it's in other languages now as well. I'm very grateful that I did it, because that was my primary motive. Whether people think that Mary's lost the plot, whether she's postmenopausal anyway, a bit crazy, or whether or not she's going into dementia, quite honestly doesn't matter in the slightest to me. I'm far too old to care. So tell someone who cares, because I don't. As far as I'm concerned, if you can't be yourself and tell your truth, then what are you doing on this planet? Because ultimately, what's the point? And this is, I say to those that come, start speaking your truth if you can, because ultimately that's the only way people are going to know and start to connect with you. And if they do it, then I have to do it too. You know, you've got to walk your talk, haven't you, really? So that's why I'm more open with what I experience, which I wouldn't have done quite so. I don't want people to focus on me. I want people to focus on the people that I talk about, because that's why I do the work that I do. So, but in a way, it helps people understand when they come to me, they can say anything they like. They'll say, I'm afraid you're going to think I'm crazy. And I'll say, well, do you want to go into parallel timelines? Do you know parallel universes, other planets, other dimensions? I'll go wherever you want to go, because if I have limits, then that limits their understanding. And that's why sometimes it's very hard, because other people are afraid that they sound completely crazy. When in fact, if you had any shamanic experiences or any experiences out of body, remote viewing, astral travel, or any of those, you know the reality of the multiple dimensions, which science is now finally admitting could be multiple and multiple and multiple, as far as we know.
Yeah, I wanted to chime in there too with the documentary Stuart was talking about. I saw it as well, and if I remember correctly, part of that was that your family there was some, and if we're getting too personal, let me know. But there was some family conflict, that you were so involved in this topic that they were starting to wonder. The way that I perceived the presentation was that we were about to see, like, if you and your son are going to even talk to each other anymore after this whole series of events takes place. Was that kind of part of it, or I mean, are you comfortable talking about that part?
Well, look, my eldest son, being a scientist, he has struggled with some of simply because it became an important focus in my work. And, you know, it's why you're so involved in this, Mum. He wasn't quite sure my sources of reference were as credible as they need to be. I mean, he's university educated and all the rest of it. Are you sure, Mum, that's credible? You know, so he's trying to be the sensible, down-to-earth person that he is. And he's a very smart guy, you know. So there was a certain amount of, well, I'm sorry, Chris, but this is what I'm seeing, and I think it's credible, or whatever. Oh, but you know, do you know about this? So we had those kinds of dialogue, and every now and again it would get a little bit heated. But ultimately, he did see that what was really the important thing is that people were empowered and helped through the support that I gave. But I do remember at the end of the filming, it tickled me pink, really. He says, Mum, I think I've heard enough about UFOs for a long time. I don't need to hear any more. It was like, I'm done. But interestingly, you know, my other two adult children are absolutely fine with all of it. They have absolutely no problem with it whatsoever. My ex-husband used that as a really good excuse for why things didn't work out. And I let him, to a certain extent, believe that. If that's what you want to believe, it's UFOs, then by all means go ahead. Because, you know, it really doesn't matter anymore, does it? You know, when you've made your decision to part ways. And I think that what I really wanted to say was, you know, do you live with truth, or are you always going to stay in that kind of denial limbo? I just think it's a waste of a life if you spend your life always hiding from your truth. And ultimately, I think it frees you. And what was it? Something about truth setting you free? I think it does. Even though you may find different friends from it and a different kind of social circle, ultimately, they're the ones that you want around you, as far as I'm concerned.
That's
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
beautiful.
If I could ask one more potentially personal question, and we could always snip this out, but have you yourself ever seen a UFO, UAP, or a non-human entity?
I've certainly seen lots of UFOs. And one of the most interesting was when I went down to Mexico, to Tepoztlan, where Carlos Diaz saw all the light ships, to his home village, or town, should I say. It was a town. They all think he's a saint, by the way. The Carlos Diaz in the 80s took the light ships and wonderful photographs of the light ships and what have you. And I went with a couple of friends and and a filmmaker and what have you. And we went and did a meditation in this field just below the pyramid and the cliffs in Tepoztlan. And we were there about 9 o'clock at night. It's really pitch black. And there were about 7 of us, and we were doing meditation. And the filmmaker was stood to one side. He was going to film it all. So we go into this meditation. And what was fascinating afterwards was I remember being really cross in the meditation because I could feel this light directly down in front of us, really too bright. And I remember thinking, I wish that filmmaker wasn't so darn close because it's disturbing my meditation, was what I was thinking at the time. So we did the meditation, we came out of it. The filmmaker was at the other end of the field. And he said to us, he moved away because we were surrounded in this mist and it scared the living daylights out of him. Wow. So he actually wasn't even there. So this light, whatever it was, 2 other people in the group saw it apart from me. And it was like this bright, bright, bright light. And I was so pissed off because I kept thinking it was this filmmaker. Something happened there. We don't know what, but that was an interesting one. But I tell you what, with the orbs that people see, I've proved to myself that they're conscious and can respond to you. Because I used to go outside my house on my deck and take pictures of different coloured orbs and what have you. And I remember once saying, can you give me a nice coloured blue one, please? And there in the next photograph was a blue orb. But I remember proving this to a gentleman who was got a camera. I said, you can call them in, you know. And he says, well, can you show me? And I said, yeah. We were on the deck and I was projecting out, can one of you please show yourselves as an orb? And I waited till I felt it was there. And I said to the gentleman with the camera, now take the picture. And as he did so, 1 meter from my hand was an orb, literally 1 meter from my hand. So you can sort of play little games like that, wow, you know, and to yourself that there's something going on. I did that with Dr. Rudy Shield, actually, when I was in Newport, and a number of researchers, and in a wonderful time there. And that was before he knew about the orbs. And he said, let's all go outside. I mean, he's an astrophysicist. So it was absolutely brilliant. And he's saying, let's go out and see if we can find some orbs. He goes, you know. So we all go out there. We're calling in the orbs left, right, and center. And I just thought it was absolutely amazing. Here's this wonderful gentleman, you know, who's, you know, from Harvard University, you know, editor of Cosmology magazine and whatever, coming outside, and we're all taking these pictures with our cameras of orbs and all the rest of it and whatever. What's the protocol, Mary? You know, what do we do or whatever?
Wow.
So I've had lots of fun like that with the orb side. I'm very fascinated by them.
Wow, thank you. I wasn't sure what the answer was because I was curious, well, if you know, anything you saw or experienced anything, or if it was just so many people that you were helping or talking about it that sort of you know, sort of convinced you of going down the path, I guess you could call it, or whatever. So thank you for sharing that.
Oh, I've had lots of fun with some of this.
One of the comments I wanted to make to you, Mary, is the bottom line is how people are changed from before they come and see you to afterwards, whether they feel more comfortable, more centered, more expanded. And that's the thing that really counts to me, you know, that you're really assisting people. And I guess you see those transformations in people that you talk to, do you, and counsel?
Well, the whole point of doing what I'm doing is to assist people not only to be heard, even being heard and telling their story, for many is all that they've asked for, because it makes them feel finally validated. And they may say it's the first time that they've ever been able to say that, this kind of information, or they share their story, because they're afraid of what people are going to say or they're going to think or whatever. So that in itself is healing. But one of the things that's been really useful is finding out the origins of those in fear over it, and finding out what they believed happened didn't happen necessarily, only their fear of what might have happened. And I'll give you a very brief summary of one that would indicate this. Was I was in England, and it was in the Lake District. There was a family whose whole car had been taken up on board craft. There was grandma, mother, and 2 boys. And so I was to help them recover the memories. The grandmother particularly was absolutely terrified. And she'd been terrified all her life. She'd obviously had experiences all her life. She was in her late 60s. And so it was her and her grandson were the 2 that I was going to help. Anyway, so I said, okay, so we're going to go to the origin of your fear, which interestingly was not the car being taken up in the you know, that had been recent. She goes right back to 2 years old in the cot, and she's in the cot And I'm saying, so what is it that's going on? She said, there's two beings looking down at me in the cot. She described them looking like the mantis type beings. So I said, so what are they doing? What's happening? What's making you scared? And she said, well, they're just observing me. So I said, so they haven't harmed you? They haven't hurt you? No, she said, they're just observing me, but it scared me so much that I've never forgotten it. And she described having this energy in her back that was the fear that she'd held all her life, all the way through her life. Well, I worked with her to release the energy. She saw that they'd helped her sequentially all her life. They've been with me as my friends all my life. They've helped. They've been amazing. They've been wonderful. They supported me in everything. And she came out of it and she said, I'm free of the fear. And she was almost dancing around the room in delight. She said, because they never, ever hurt me. All they've done is ever support me. She couldn't believe how she felt because she'd hung on to that fear. And all that had happened was she saw something scary. And I remember her grandson saying, not sure I want to do this now. I've changed my mind. I want to go to school. And she's saying, look at me. She said, look how I'm feeling. And she said, I wouldn't not have done this for anything now. She said, I feel absolutely amazing. So he complied. And the interesting thing was, now this is an interesting one, because he was only 15. And he said that he saw the beings in the garden. He saw the craft. He saw the beings coming down to the garden. And he said, and then there were 3 orbs of light. And he said, I said, so what are the orbs of light? And he said, there's great granddad and my great uncle and someone else of the family. I said, so how do you know who they are? He says, because they've told me. And they've told me they're here, so I won't be scared. So these orbs of light were they'd all passed on, obviously, and that was the form they'd shown him. And when the being went up back into the craft, he said the orbs of light went with the being onto the craft. And he then said, they're telling me I can't do drugs, I can't do this, I've got abilities, I need to honor myself. And he gave a whole mandate of what he'd been told. And that's what came out of his regression.
Now, you mentioned Whitley Strieber's book earlier, Communion. After he published that book, he was inundated with letters and people reaching out to him to share their experiences. And his wife, Anne, read many of those accounts. And Whitley says one time she came out of the office and said, Whitley, this has something to do with what we call death. And that seems to tie in with what you're talking about there, which I find really fascinating. It brings us back to the whole shamanistic kind of approach to the thing, to the situation.
The reason I brought that in is I've had many regressions with different individuals where they've described the soul container. In metaphysics called the Merkaba, as you know, the light body. And I remember doing a regression with a very well-known researcher who was with her partner, and she said the partner was freaked out when she woke up because he said all night he'd seen these orbs of light traveling around the room and what have you. And he said, and I couldn't wake you up. I couldn't wake you up. And she said after, when she did the regression, that it was actually her out of body, and he'd been seeing the ball of light, but it was actually her. And she said he was so freaked out, we parted ways because he couldn't handle it. So certainly some of them, without question, I believe, are the souls in the Merkaba, but they say also some of them are craft, there's intelligence gathering, but many of them are the different beings in the form of light. And I've had also many tell me they've had dialogue with these orbs of light and understood more about that being an intelligence. So sometimes that's how they'll come, as this ball of light.
Wow, fascinating.
One question I wanted to ask multiple times, actually, but I didn't want to interrupt the flow. I don't know if that was a good thing or a bad thing, but do you happen to have potentially and something that we could maybe put up as a visual aid for like the symbols that people have been shown or seen? Would you be willing to share those?
Yeah.
Okay.
I've got loads and loads of them.
What I'm going to do, I'm going to switch our screen right now, and then we can put them up in like after the fact. So Stuart and I won't actually see them until after, but I'm just going to push a little button here, and now we have you're on one TV screen. There's a blank TV screen on the left where we can put up some of these examples. It's a nice sort of visual presentation. But that would be fabulous, because when you were talking about that, I thought how great it would be to see what those things look like, and then to show everybody who's watching this particular show. So if you don't mind, that would be.
I'm happy to do that. What I also have in a very recent presentation was showing that on a craft of 20,000 years ago is similar symbols that was found in a craft in South America, and the symbols are almost identical to the ones that people are starting to draw now. And even, I will say, I've had 4-year-olds do symbols on their bodies and actually write symbols and say, "These are important, Mummy. These are important." And they're 4 years old. So it's really fascinating.
Yeah, that would be great. I'd love to see those. I'm gonna switch our view back to the regular. In terms of, I mean, you are potentially perhaps the most well-known therapist in all of Australia who specializes in, the abduction phenomena, as it were. What would your advice be to any therapist around the world who's listening or watching to this, who has their own, patients and clients talking about these things, in terms of what would you tell those other folks in terms of being open to talking about it, or being open to even helping their clients and patients about it? Anything in particular?
I think the one thing that I would say, and the one thing that I've learned, is not to have limits in how you personally understand reality. Not to let that blind you to the fact that there are many people having multidimensional experiences, going to other realities and what have you, and that just by listening and honoring their experiences, whether or not it's your experience or not, is probably the most healing thing that you can do. So people feel heard. Ultimately, what can help is if you're informed yourself and realize, or can validate some of them by saying there are other people that have experienced these kinds of things, is always very helpful. But one of the things that has always been said, don't read up on it to somebody who's having an experience. Don't read up on it because it'll compromise your own information. It will influence you and what have you. And I say the opposite. And the reason I say that is, if you're looking at stuff and you're particularly drawn to something, it's because it resonates with you. It's not because, that looks interesting and I'll take that on board. So you're only really being drawn to stuff that in some way is triggering you, which means that that's actually valid to you. Because some people say, well, I read about this, so I thought I'll come out with it because I've read about it. And I'm saying, no, the reason that you've actually highlighted that is because it actually means something. It's actually telling you something when you actually resonate with it. So actually be informed, in other words. Certainly for a therapist, be informed as much as you can, because this is a huge topic, a huge phenomena, and you don't know what you don't know. So keep an open mind, okay? Because you really don't know what you don't know. And believe me, there are things that I talk about now quite naturally. 20 years ago, I was still struggling with, and I found that if I'm not sure about something, I'll put it in a box and say, right, if there's more to this, then I'll wait for more information to come along, and until I'm satisfied that it meets all my criteria, then I'll look at it again. But don't dismiss it, because you don't know what you don't know.
Wow, that's great. Thank you very much. Well, okay, this is, I don't know, this might be a little bit heady, but maybe a good way to sort of round it out. I was recently at, it was really interesting. It was sort of like a drum circle sound bath combination, and the host had presented the, I don't know what you call it, like the idea of fact versus opinion. And he started out by saying, like, a mother was talking to the daughter, and the sky is blue is a fact, and In-N-Out Burger has the best cheeseburger in the world is an opinion. But for the daughter, the In-N-Out Burger, that was a fact, not an opinion. But going long story to get to the point, but with the idea of, is this real, is this not real, is it physical, is it non-physical, same kind of thing here with the idea of fact versus opinion. Just what are your thoughts are on that, in terms of, like, could we all have different realities perhaps, or
I think we all do have different realities in the sense that there's a consensus reality, which we're experiencing with everyone else. But there's also a personal reality that is unique to us in how we perceive our world. I remember some facts a long time ago about how much we take in terms of bits of information in one moment in time. And we actually are capable of taking in 12,000 bits of information in one particular moment.
Oh my God.
Of that 12,000 bits, we only take in 8
Wow.
of that 12,000 bits. And of that 8, that is biased with our belief system. So integrity of the information may only be 4 bits of information out of that 12,000. So our pinhead is our personal reality of reality.
Wow.
And somebody else might have a pinhead of this one. So we've got the consensus, and when we've got our personal experience. And that is why I work with the person's personal reality, because that's the one that they need to look at or want to honor or validate as actually having integrity. And if it has resonance and meaning to them and helps them understand their world in a healthy way, then it's about, giving them or assisting them to have confidence in what it is they're experiencing, because nobody but you knows what it's like for certain things. It's like having an appendectomy. I used to, as I say, be a nurse. Everyone who has an appendectomy will have a different version of how they experience that appendectomy, even though it was the same procedure. And that's the same with everything in our lives. You are never going to know how somebody else feels about something else, because yours will be unique to you and theirs will be unique to them. So it's about honoring that and saying, well, when I had it, it wasn't like that. Well, no, it wasn't, because you weren't them. So you can't dismiss their understanding experience because you're not them any more than they know you.
Wow, that question came out all jumbled, but that answer hit me like a ton of bricks. That was really profound. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, just one final thought and observation. So Mike and I have both been interested in this subject since childhood. And when I attended your workshop, Mary, one of the things you turned around and said to me was, Stuart, this is verbatim, Stuart, you need to ask yourself why you're so interested in this topic. And you kind of covered that, and that stuck with me for a long time. I contemplated that, and you just sort of touched on that in one of your responses just now.
Well, I will say this too. We have all these multidimensional senses that we haven't even isolated yet: knowing, sensing, feeling, downloads, and what have you. And people say, when it comes to past lives, I say to people this: if you've got a particular fascination for a particular country that you've always wanted to visit more than another country, it might be Russia, or it might be Mexico, or it might be whatever. There's a reason why you're drawn to that country rather than another. And it usually means there's a part of you has a resonance or a knowing or a connection in some way. When you start listening to that and following that thread, more information comes, because you're trusting that part of you that's multidimensional. Because the other thing I didn't tell you about the DNA, and the scientists that have looked into this, in particularly the ones in Russia that I talk about, saying that actually our DNA is a portal to multidimensional reality. So intuition, all those things come through the DNA, and the portal in the DNA that accesses information. And the more we listen to that knowing, sensing, feeling, the more we're tapping into our multidimensional awareness and self. So, and the science is all there. They're saying that actually, my science has gone out the window at the
Rosen
moment.
Bridge. Yeah.
Rosen Bridge. Our DNA creates that bridge.
Wow.
It has the frequency to create a portal. And now, talking about this is scientific data I'm talking about. There's a book called Intelligent Design, I think. Oh, not Intelligent Design. I can send you the links to it and what have you, but they're talking about also that DNA can be changed by words and frequencies. And they found this out, that, there's certain human language that can literally alter DNA into a new frequency, that you don't have to cut out genes that aren't helpful. You can actually alter it through human language, and the right human language. That's why affirmations work.
Oh, yeah.
Because you actually use frequency, a positive frequency to alter your DNA. But they're saying, but also because our DNA has the capacity to create portals into other dimensions. And that's where our intuition comes and all the other things, because we're literally accessing our multidimensional awareness through our DNA. And the science is all there.
Wow, this has been absolutely amazing and an absolute honor to have you here. So much love to you, my friend. Can you please share where people can find out more about you and your books and information?
Well, you just have to Google me, Mary Rodwell, but I'm ACERN.com.au, maryrodwell.com.au, Alien Lady, any of those will come up with the information, and you can email me. There's a questionnaire on my website, but I can send you a questionnaire, and it's not your standard questionnaire. It's one that is going into more of the multidimensional as well. So it's not just, have you seen a UFO? Because for some people, that's not been the important thing. What's been important is they've had some kind of interaction multidimensionally with them, and they may not even remember it. So there's questionnaires in there if you want to find out whether or not this is relevant to you. And my books can get in Australia, you can get the books directly from me if you want a signed copy, and New Zealand.
Wow, thank you so much. So much love to you.
Thank you, Stuart and Mike. It's been an absolute
Mary.
pleasure.
It was a pleasure virtually meeting you, and I really appreciate your time. And I'm honored to share this time with you. It was really special for me. Thank you so much.
Oh, it's been a pleasure, guys, and thank you for all you're doing, because without you, we wouldn't have the opportunity to share what we're learning, and it goes and you're enabling it to go to so many people and help so many people. So my thanks to both of you for your time and energy for doing this.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
All right. Well, Stuart, I'm speechless. That was amazing. Absolutely amazing.
Yeah, what a fantastic person, Mike. Just a beautiful person, expanding our consciousness collectively, supporting people who are experiencing these weird situations and phenomena. And, she's just there, for these people and ourselves.
Yeah, and I mean, we've definitely said it before, but not everyone might watch every episode. But I did want to say this: if for the people out there who have watched each and every single episode, I think this is the 9th one we're doing, and we currently have over 15 hours of nonstop, amazing, intellectually stimulating and mind expanding conversations. And I said this to you sort of off the record, but I'll say it here. For me personally, I've said, I've studied it all my life and, actively investigate, and then, that's all true. But I think going through this process for me is really speeding that up in a way, or making me make connections that I otherwise maybe wouldn't. Going out to groups is a wonderful thing to do. Reading books is a wonderful thing to do. And listening to podcasts like this is a wonderful thing to do. But I think being part of the process really, something's different about it. And I truly think that, so what I'm trying to say is, if anyone actually listens to all of them in a row, because they do sort of build upon each other, you'll have hundreds and hundreds of hours of research boiled down into what I hope is bite-sized pieces to maybe understand this. And dare I say, I'm almost starting to think I might be coming to some conclusions and answers myself as to what this is all about. And I'm not going to say exactly what it is yet, but I can understand why people like Tucker Carlson, a very outspoken and well-known person, who's recently talking about how this can go to a dark place. And Mary touched upon that a little bit as well. And I guess it depends on how you view it.
Yeah, very interesting. I liked how she mentioned Kevin Day, what a beautiful person he is. And it's just
our
really
first guest, episodes 3 and 4, if anyone hasn't checked those out.
That's right. The connections are so interesting. The themes that are emerging between guests. Yeah, just amazing. I think it's fantastic, the change in our collective consciousness since the Tic Tac, how that's become widely known now and accepted. And it's facilitated the ability for people to now talk about these issues. And, Mary's right there for that kind of thing. And all these discussions have been amazing, on point, talking about these topics. And there's a definite thread between the different interviews we've done. And I'm finding it expanding in myself, Mike. It's been amazing.
Yeah, it's truly, it's, I don't know what else to say. I really feel honored to be doing this with you and to be talking with each and every person that we've talked to thus far. It's, most of the time, and in fact, probably all the time, the people that we're talking to are like, the keynote speakers and headliners at events that people would go to about this topic. So we're really, I don't know what the word is. Privilege sounds silly, but it truly is to be part of that. And keeping right in line with that, our next guest, actually, we can announce now because we have that already scheduled. And that is going to be one of my friends, my mentor and UFO boss here, the director of Southern California MUFON. His name is Mr. Earl Grey Anderson, and he's a retired nurse. And he's been formally investigating a lot longer than I have. And he's also specializing in some of the abduction cases, like what Mary was talking about. So we're going to be talking with Earl and get his perspective in the medical field. And I want to sort of focus on the ontological shock and explain to folks what that is and how it affects some folks when they have these types of experiences or encounters.
Oh, Mike, really looking forward to that. That's going to be seamless leading on from Mary's interview that we've just conducted. I can't wait for that.
Absolutely. So we'll see you all next time when we dig right into that. Thanks so much. Remember to like, subscribe, share, comment, and blast this off to the world.
Thank you.
Thank you.